My husband refused to let me name our daughter after my late mother. Then I found out why he was so against it. My husband and I have been married for 6 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years, got engaged, did everything the right way. He's a good man. He's always been a good man. That's what made this so hard to understand. I'm currently 8 months pregnant with our first child, a girl. We've been talking about names for months, and I told him early on that I wanted to name her after my mother, who passed away from breast cancer when I was 19. Her name was Vivian. It's a beautiful name, and it would mean everything to me to hear it again, to call my daughter by my mother's name, to keep some part of her alive. My husband said no. Not maybe, not let's discuss it, just no. I asked him why, and he said he just didn't like the name. I told him it wasn't about whether he liked it. It was about honoring my mother. And he said he understood that, but the answer was still no. I was hurt. I cried. I asked him how he could be so dismissive of something that meant so much to me, and he just kept saying he was sorry, but he couldn't do it. He wouldn't explain further. This went on for weeks. Every time I brought it up, he shut it down. He suggested other names. He said we could use Vivian as a middle name, but not a first name. I asked why the distinction mattered, and he said it just did. I started to resent him. I told my sister about it, and she said he was being unreasonable and selfish. I told his mother about it, hoping she would talk some sense into him, and she got very quiet on the phone and said she would call me back. She never did. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Last week, I decided I was done waiting for an explanation. I told him I wasn't going to drop this, and if he couldn't give me a real reason, then I was going to name our daughter Vivian with or without his blessing. He looked at me for a long time. Then he sat down on the couch and told me to sit next to him. He said there was something he never told me about his life before we met. He said when he was 22, before he transferred to our college, he was in a relationship with a woman. They dated for almost 2 years. He said her name was Vivian. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't say anything. He kept talking. He said they were serious, that he thought he was going to marry her, that they had talked about having kids together. Then she got pregnant. He said they were scared but happy. They started planning a life together. Then at 5 months, she went into early labor. The baby didn't survive. He said Vivian blamed herself. She fell into a depression so severe she had to be hospitalized. He visited her every day for 2 months. Then one night he got a call from her mother. Vivian had taken her own life. He said he never told me because he didn't know how. He said he spent years in therapy trying to move past it. He said when he met me, he felt like he finally had a second chance at life, and he didn't want to bring that darkness into our relationship. He said hearing that name every single day for the rest of his life, calling our daughter by that name, would break him. He said he knows it's selfish, but he physically cannot do it. He was crying by the end. I had never seen him cry like that before. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. Part of me understands. How could I not understand? He went through something horrific and he's been carrying it alone for years. But another part of me is angry. He kept this from me for our entire relationship. He let me believe he was just being stubborn about a name when really he was hiding an entire chapter of his life. A dead girlfriend, a dead baby, years of trauma I knew nothing about. I asked him why he didn't just tell me the truth from the beginning. He said he was afraid I would look at him differently. I asked him if there was anything else he hadn't told me. He said no. I don't know if I believe him. Now I'm stuck. I can't name my daughter Vivian anymore. I know that. Even if I wanted to, which I don't think I do, I couldn't do that to him after hearing what he went through. But I also can't pretend everything is fine. He lied to me. Maybe not directly, but he hid something massive and let me spend weeks feeling dismissed and unheard when he could have just told me the truth. My sister says I should be grateful he finally opened up. My mother-in-law called me the next day and apologized for not saying anything. She said it wasn't her story to tell. Everyone is acting like I should just move on and focus on the baby. But every time I look at him now, I wonder what else he's keeping from me. I wonder who else knows things about my husband that I don't. I'm 8 months pregnant and I feel like I'm married to a stranger. We haven't talked about names since that conversation. We've barely talked at all. He keeps asking if I'm okay, and I keep saying I need time. I don't know how much time will be enough. I don't even know what I'm waiting for. I spend 3 days moving through our house like we're two people who just met and don't know how to talk yet. He asks if I need him to pick up more prenatal vitamins. I tell him yes. He mentions we should probably install the car seat soon. I nod and say, okay. We eat dinner across from each other, and the only sounds are forks on plates and the hum of the refrigerator. At night, we lie on opposite sides of the bed with what feels like miles between us, even though I can feel the heat from his body. He reaches over once in the dark and puts his hand on my belly when the baby kicks. I let him keep it there for maybe 10 seconds before I shift positions and his hand falls away. The silence feels worse than fighting would be. At least fighting would mean we're still trying to reach each other. This feels like we've both given up on trying. I catch him looking at me sometimes when he thinks I'm not paying attention. He opens his mouth like he's going to say something, and then closes it again. I do the same thing. We're both waiting for the other person to know what to say first. The nursery sits half-finished with paint samples still taped to the wall, and the crib only partially assembled. Neither of us has touched it since that night. Every time I walk past that room, I feel this weight in my chest that makes it hard to breathe. My phone rings on the fourth day, and it's Layla. She doesn't even say hello, just asks if I'm okay. Something about hearing her voice makes everything crack open. I start crying so hard I can barely get words out. I tell her everything he told me about his ex-girlfriend and the baby and the hospital and the suicide. She's quiet for a long time, and then she says she wants to reach through the phone and shake him. She says 6 years of marriage and he kept something like that from me. She says she doesn't care what his reasons were. That's not how you treat someone you love. I'm crying harder now because part of me has been thinking the same thing, but hearing her say it out loud makes it real. Then I hear her talking to someone in the background, and suddenly Isaiah is on the phone. His voice is calm and low. He tells me he's not defending what my husband did, but he wants me to think about something. He says sometimes men carry things alone because they don't know how to share them without falling apart. He says his own father kept his war trauma locked up for 30 years, and it nearly destroyed him. He says maybe my husband wasn't lying to hurt me. Maybe he was just trying to survive. Layla gets back on the phone and tells Isaiah he's not helping. They start arguing with each other about it, and I have to tell them I need to go. After I hang up, I sit on the couch for a long time thinking about what Isaiah said. I don't know if it makes me feel better or worse. That night, I find my husband in the kitchen making tea. I ask him if he's been lying about anything else. He looks at me and I can see him trying to decide something. Then he takes out his phone and opens his calendar app. He scrolls back through years of appointments. Every other Tuesday at 4 o'clock, there's an entry that just says Dr. Watts. He keeps scrolling and the appointments go back and back. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. He tells me Dr. Watts is his therapist. He's been seeing him since before we met. He shows me the payment history in his banking app, and there are hundreds of transactions. I feel something shift in my chest. He wasn't hiding his past to deceive me. He was actively working through it. He was trying to heal from it. I look at all those appointments and I think about him driving there every other Tuesday for years, sitting in that office, doing the hard work of processing something that nearly killed him. I ask why he never told me he was in therapy. He says he thought I would ask what he was working on, and he didn't know how to explain it without telling me everything. He says he kept thinking he would tell me when he was more healed, when the past didn't hurt so much, but the right time never came. We try to have a real conversation about moving forward. We sit on the couch with space between us, and he says he wants to fix this. I start crying because I don't even know what fixing it would look like. I tell him I don't know who he really is anymore. I thought I knew everything about him, and now I realize there was this whole part of his life I never saw. He says he's the same person he's always been. I say that's not true. The person I married wouldn't have kept something this big from me. He reaches for my hand and I pull it back without thinking. I see the hurt flash across his face and I feel bad, but I can't help it. My body doesn't want to be touched by him right now. He puts his hands in his lap and looks down. He asks what I need from him. I tell him I don't know. We sit there for a while longer not talking, and then he gets up and goes to bed. I stay on the couch until after midnight just staring at nothing. The next morning I call a therapist. I find one online who specializes in relationship issues and pregnancy stress. Her name is Elise Soto, and she can see me that same afternoon. I don't tell my husband where I'm going, just that I have an appointment. Her office is in a small building downtown with plants in the waiting room and soft music playing. She's younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes. I sit on her couch and tell her everything. The name issue, the revelation, the silence between us now. She listens without interrupting and takes notes on a yellow pad. When I'm done, she asks me what I'm most afraid of. I open my mouth to say I'm afraid he's hiding other things, but that's not what comes out. I say I'm afraid I can't trust my own judgment about people anymore. I say I thought I knew him better than anyone, and I was completely wrong. She writes something down and asks what that means about me if I was wrong. I realize I'm afraid it means I'm not good at seeing people clearly. I'm afraid it means I can't trust myself to make good decisions about who to let into my life. She asks if my husband has given me any other reasons not to trust him besides this one thing. I think about it and I have to say no. In 6 years, he's never lied to me about anything else as far as I know. He's never been unfaithful. He's never broken promises. She says that's worth considering. My phone rings while I'm driving home from therapy. It's a number I don't recognize, but I answer anyway. A man's voice asks if this is me, and when I say yes, he tells me his name is Dylan. He says he's my husband's best friend from college. I remember my husband mentioning him before, but I've never met him because he lives in Seattle now. Dylan asks if he can come over to talk to me. He says he's in town visiting family and my husband doesn't know he's calling. Something about the urgency in his voice makes me say yes. He shows up an hour later. He's tall with glasses and he looks uncomfortable standing on our porch. I let him in and we sit in the living room. He tells me he was there. He was there when my husband got the call about his ex-girlfriend's death. He was there when my husband stopped eating and stopped sleeping and stopped being able to form complete sentences. He tells me about visiting my husband in the psychiatric hospital where he spent 3 weeks because his therapist was worried he might hurt himself. He says my husband couldn't speak for the first week he was there. He would just sit in the common room staring at the wall. Dylan says he drove 2 hours each way every single day to visit him because he genuinely thought his friend might not survive that grief. He tells me about the funeral where my husband had to be physically held up by two people because he couldn't stand on his own. He says watching someone you love go through that changes you. He says he's never seen pain like that before or since. I start crying while Dylan is talking. Not because I'm sad for myself anymore, but because I'm trying to imagine my husband going through that and I can't. The man I know is steady and calm and handles things. The man Dylan is describing sounds like someone who is completely broken. Dylan tells me my husband spent 2 years after that just trying to learn how to be a person again. He says my husband told him once that he didn't think he deserved to be happy after what happened. He thought he should have seen the signs that his ex-girlfriend was suicidal. He thought he should have saved her somehow. Dylan says meeting me was the first time he saw his friend smile a real smile in years. He says my husband called him after our second date and said he felt like he'd been given permission to live again instead of just survive. I'm crying harder now. Dylan reaches over and puts a box of tissues in front of me. He says he's not telling me this to make me forgive my husband or to say what he did was okay. He just wants me to understand that the secret wasn't about me. It was about my husband trying to protect himself from drowning in something that almost killed him once already. After Dylan leaves, I sit on the couch for a long time thinking about my husband at 22, sitting in a hospital room unable to speak. We have an OB/GYN appointment the next week. We drive there in silence and sit in the waiting room surrounded by couples who all look happy and excited. There's a woman across from us showing her husband a list of baby names on her phone. They're laughing about one of them. Another couple is looking at ultrasound pictures together. I feel like we're the only people in the room who are miserable. The nurse calls us back and takes my blood pressure and weight. The doctor comes in and asks how we're doing. She looks at both of us and I can tell she can sense something is wrong. She asks if we've settled on a name yet. My husband and I both say no at the exact same time. The doctor looks between us and there's this awkward pause. She says we still have time, but we should probably decide soon for the birth certificate paperwork. She does the exam and checks the baby's heartbeat and says everything looks good. The baby is healthy and positioned well. I should go into labor any time in the next 2 to 4 weeks. When we get back to the car, my husband just sits there with his hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine. He says he's sorry this is all such a mess. I don't know what to say to that, so I don't say anything. That night, I find a note on my pillow. It's in my husband's handwriting on a piece of notebook paper. At the top, it says he's been thinking about names. Below that are 3 options with little descriptions next to each one. Eleanor after Eleanor Roosevelt. Amelia after Amelia Earhart. Marie after Marie Curie. Next to each name, he's written why he chose it and what he loves about it. For Eleanor, he wrote that she was strong and compassionate and fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. For Amelia, he wrote that she was brave and never let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. For Marie, he wrote that she was brilliant and changed the world through her determination. At the bottom of the page, he wrote that he knows none of these can replace what I lost, but he hopes one of them might honor the kind of woman my mother was. I sit on the bed holding the note and crying. It's such a small gesture, but it feels like he's trying. It feels like he's trying to build a bridge between us, even though he doesn't know if I'll meet him halfway. I fold the note carefully and put it in my nightstand drawer. The next morning, I'm looking for a sweater in our closet, and I knock over a box I've never noticed before. It's pushed way back in the corner behind my husband's winter coats. The lid comes off and sympathy cards spill out across the floor. I pick one up and it has a picture of white lilies on the front. Inside, someone wrote about how sorry they were for his loss. I open another one and another one. There are dozens of them. At the bottom of the box is a hospital bracelet. It's tiny, the kind they put on newborns. There's no name on it. Just a date and a time and the word baby followed by my husband's last name. I'm holding it in my hand when I find the letter. It's on cream-colored stationery and the handwriting is shaky. It starts with Dear Michael and I realize I'm reading something meant for my husband. The letter is from his ex-girlfriend's mother. She thanks him for loving her daughter. She says she knows he did everything he could. She says she doesn't blame him and she hopes someday he won't blame himself. She tells him he deserves to be happy and her daughter would want that for him. The letter is dated 8 months after the girlfriend's death. I sit on the closet floor surrounded by all these pieces of my husband's past that I never knew existed. This wasn't just his tragedy. There were whole families torn apart by what happened. Parents who lost a daughter, a baby that never got to take a breath, a young man who almost didn't survive his grief. I put everything back in the box carefully and push it back into the corner where he kept it hidden. When my husband gets home from work that evening, I don't tell him I found it. I just watch him move through our house and I try to see him the way Dylan described him, broken and silent and barely alive. I try to imagine him carrying all of that alone for so many years. I wait 2 days before I bring it up again. We're sitting at the kitchen table eating dinner, and the silence between us feels like something solid I could reach out and touch. My husband keeps glancing at me like he's waiting for me to say something. I put my fork down and tell him we need to talk about this. He nods and says he knows. I tell him I understand why he couldn't use the name. I really do. But understanding his pain doesn't make my anger go away. He looks confused and asks what I mean. I explain that he let me think he was just being difficult when really he was hiding this massive part of his life. He says he was trying to protect both of us from darkness I couldn't understand. I feel something hot rise in my chest and I tell him that's not how marriage is supposed to work. He argues that I don't know what it was like, that telling me would have brought all that trauma back into his life when he'd worked so hard to move past it. I say I'm his wife and I should have known, that he should have trusted me with the truth. He stands up and says he was barely surviving back then, and he didn't want me to see him as damaged. I stand up too and tell him I deserve the choice to decide that for myself. We're both raising our voices now, and I realize this is the first real fight we've had in years. He says he did what he thought was right, and I say he thought wrong. The baby kicks hard and I have to sit back down. He immediately stops arguing and asks if I'm okay. I tell him I'm fine, but we're not done talking about this. He sits back down, but neither of us says anything else. We finish dinner in silence. 3 days later, I'm sitting in Elise's office for my first therapy session. She asks me to explain what brought me here, and I tell her everything. She listens without interrupting, and when I'm done, she asks me why I was so attached to using my mother's name specifically as a first name rather than a middle name. The question catches me off guard. I tell her it's because I want to honor my mother's memory. Elise nods and asks what that means to me. I say I want to keep her alive somehow, to hear her name every day, to feel like she's still part of my life. Elise writes something down and asks if I think my mother would want to be kept alive through my daughter, or honored through my memories of her. I don't know how to answer that. She asks me to think about the difference between resurrection and remembrance. I sit there for a long time trying to understand what she means. Then it hits me. I've been trying to bring my mother back instead of accepting that she's gone. I start crying and Elise hands me a tissue. She says grief makes us do things that feel like love, but are really about our own pain. I realize she's right. I've been so focused on what I need that I haven't thought about what's actually healthy for my daughter, or fair to my husband. That night, my husband suggests we try talking again with some ground rules. He says we each get to speak without interruption, and the other person has to really listen. I agree because I'm tired of fighting. He goes first. He tells me about the guilt he's carried for years, thinking he should have seen the signs that his girlfriend was suicidal. He says he replays their last conversations over and over, wondering what he missed. He talks about the therapy and the medication and the nights he couldn't sleep because he kept seeing her face. He says meeting me felt like being given permission to live again instead of just survive. When he's done, I take my turn. I tell him I feel like our entire relationship might be built on things he's hidden from me. I say I keep wondering what else he hasn't told me and if I ever really knew him at all. I explain that feeling dismissed about the name hurt more because I thought he just didn't care, when really he was protecting a secret. He reaches for my hand across the table and I let him take it. He says there's nothing else he's hiding and he'll prove it to me however he needs to. I want to believe him, but I'm not sure I can yet. 2 weeks go by and things feel almost normal again. We talk more openly and he tells me small things about his past that he never mentioned before. Then his mother calls me and during the conversation she mentions that she told my husband's brother about the situation. She says it casually like it's not a big deal. I ask her when she told him and she says right after it happened that she needed someone to talk to about it. I feel something cold settle in my stomach. I hang up and sit on the couch staring at nothing. My husband comes home from work and finds me like that. He asks what's wrong and I tell him about the phone call. He looks confused about why I'm upset. I explain that his mother knew about his past, his brother knows about his past, probably other people in his family know things about him that I don't. The reminder that I'm the last person to know anything about my own husband sends me spiraling backward. He tries to explain that his mother needed support too, and she had to tell someone. I say I understand that, but it doesn't change how it makes me feel. We don't fight this time, but the distance between us feels wider than before. I spend the next few days thinking about names. I go through baby name books and websites and make lists. Nothing feels right until I come across Eleanor. It means bright light, and I think about how my mother was that for me. Her middle name was Rose. I write down Eleanor Rose and stare at it for a long time. It feels like a compromise with myself. I'm honoring my mother without forcing my husband to relive his trauma every single day. I'm choosing both of us instead of just my grief. When my husband gets home that evening, I tell him I've decided on a name. He looks nervous and asks what it is. I say Eleanor Rose. He asks about the Rose part, and I tell him it was my mother's middle name. He sits down next to me and asks if I'm sure. I tell him I am, that this feels right. He looks relieved and also sad somehow. He says it's a beautiful name. I say I think so too. That night, my husband can't sleep. I wake up at 2 a.m. and find him sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. I ask him what's wrong and he starts crying. He tells me more about his therapy journey, about how he learned to function again after wanting to die. He says the therapist taught him that surviving wasn't the same as living. He talks about the years he spent going through the motions, working and eating and sleeping, but feeling nothing. He says when he met me, it was the first time he felt like he had permission to actually live, instead of just survive. He explains that he didn't tell me about his past because he was terrified I'd see him as broken and leave. He says he thought if he could just be normal enough, happy enough, good enough, then maybe I'd never have to know about the darkness he came from. I'm crying now too. I tell him I wish he'd trusted me with the truth from the beginning. He says he knows, and he's sorry. I realize his silence came from fear of losing me, not from wanting to deceive me. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes sense. The next morning, we sit down at the kitchen table with coffee, and I tell him we need to talk about what we each need going forward. He nods and waits for me to start. I say I need complete transparency even when it's uncomfortable, that I can't build trust if he's hiding things to protect me. He agrees immediately. Then he says he needs patience while he learns to be vulnerable about things he spent years trying to forget. He explains that talking about his past isn't easy, and sometimes he'll need time to find the words. I tell him I can give him that as long as he's actually trying. We shake hands like we're making a business deal and both laugh a little. It feels like we're starting over in some way, building something new on top of what we already had. 3 days before my due date, we finally finish the nursery. We've been putting it off for weeks, but now there's no more time to wait. My husband paints the last wall while I organize tiny clothes in the dresser. He hangs the name Eleanor on the wall above the crib. It's made of white wooden letters that we ordered online. We both stand there looking at it for a long time. He starts crying first, and then I do too. He says he's relieved and grateful. I say I'm accepting that our path forward won't erase the past, but can honor both our losses. He hugs me carefully around my huge belly and tells me he loves me. I say I love him too. The baby kicks between us and we both laugh through our tears. I go into labor 2 days later at 4 a.m. The first contraction wakes me up and I know immediately what it is. I shake my husband awake and tell him it's time. He jumps out of bed and starts running around grabbing bags and checking lists. I sit on the edge of the bed breathing through another contraction. The drive to the hospital is a blur. They get me into a room and hook me up to monitors. The pain gets worse and worse until there's nothing else in the world except the next contraction. My husband holds my hand through every single one. He doesn't let go even when I'm squeezing so hard I think I might break his fingers. Hours pass. The doctor comes in and checks me and says I'm almost ready. More hours, more pain. Then suddenly they're telling me to push. My husband is crying and telling me I can do this. I push and scream and push again. Then Eleanor is born and they put her on my chest and we're both sobbing. The distance between us feels like it never existed. There's just our daughter and us, and nothing else matters. The first week home with Eleanor is the hardest thing I've ever done. She cries every 2 hours wanting to eat. I'm exhausted and sore and emotional. My husband changes every diaper at 3 a.m. without complaining. I watch him sing softly to our daughter while he rocks her back to sleep. His voice is gentle and full of love. I see clearly that he's not hiding anything now. He's completely present and vulnerable and real. Eleanor falls asleep on his chest and he looks at me with tears in his eyes. He whispers that he never thought he'd get to have this. I tell him I'm glad he did. We sit together in the dim light of the nursery and I know we're going to be okay. 2 weeks after Eleanor was born, I sat in the rocking chair with her sleeping against my chest. My husband came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea and set mine on the side table. He sat down on the floor next to us and just watched her breathe for a minute. Then he looked up at me and said he was grateful I didn't give up on us. The words came out quiet and careful. I told him I almost did. He nodded like he already knew. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about how close we came to breaking completely. How I packed a bag twice during that last month of pregnancy and sat with it by the door. How he slept in his car one night because he couldn't stand being in the house knowing I might leave. How we both wondered if we'd made a mistake trying to fix something that felt so damaged. But sitting there with Eleanor between us, the honesty felt different from it had before. It felt like we were choosing each other again instead of just staying together out of obligation or fear. He reached over and touched Eleanor's tiny hand, and I put my hand over his. We didn't say anything else, but something shifted in that moment. At Eleanor's 1-month checkup, the pediatrician asked how we were adjusting to parenthood. My husband and I looked at each other and both smiled in that exhausted way new parents do. We told her it was hard, but we were figuring it out together. She nodded and made notes on her chart and moved on to checking Eleanor's weight and measurements. But I kept thinking about what I'd said. It was true for both parenting and our marriage. We were figuring it out together. Not perfectly and not without stumbling, but together. That afternoon, my husband suggested we plant a tree in our backyard. He said it could be in memory of both my mother and the baby he lost. We drove to a nursery and walked around looking at different options. We chose a flowering cherry tree that would bloom pink every spring. Back home, we dug a hole together in the corner of the yard where it would get good sun. Before we planted the tree, my husband pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was the hospital bracelet from his baby and a photo of my mother I'd given him years ago. I added my mother's favorite earrings that I'd been keeping in my jewelry box. We buried them beneath the tree roots and then filled in the dirt. Standing there looking at what we'd planted, it felt like we were making peace with grief instead of running from it. 6 weeks postpartum, I was feeding Eleanor on the couch when my husband came home from work. He dropped his bag and immediately started playing peekaboo with her. She was too young to really respond, but he kept doing it anyway, making silly faces and hiding behind his hands. I watched them together and felt something settle in my chest. We were going to be okay. Not perfect and not without more hard conversations ahead, but okay. We were choosing honesty now instead of silence. We were choosing vulnerability instead of protection. That felt like the strongest foundation we could possibly build.